So first I'd like to introduce Rosa Carrillo. She is the director of the Language Access Program for the District of Columbia, housed under the Office of Human Rights. She has previously served as the Language Service Program Director at Multicultural Community Services for more than 16 years. During her tenure as the LSP Director, she developed and expanded a comprehensive curriculum for the Community Interpreter Training Program in the District of Columbia. Alkindi Kadar is the Program Support Specialist for the Language Access Program, housed under the Office of Human Rights. He has previously worked as a language access provider and advocate, partnering with city agencies to provide quality language services to non-English and limited English proficient individuals in the district. My name is Gail Fast, and I am a program specialist at the OANC, and I usually introduce all the training. So I'm essentially the training coordinator at this point, but I also want to say that my colleague, Dawn Dickerson, who many of you know, is also on the call. So without further ado, Rosa and Alkindi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for participating today in this conversation. I'll call it more because I hope I can get some questions so we can answer if we have time. So moving forward again, my name is Rosa Carrillo. I'm the director of the Language Access Program for the district, as he'll introduce us. And with me is Alkindi. And just to let you know that there are two more members of our team that are not with us tonight, but we'll always be available to answer your questions. So tonight, I want to talk about language access and also about the reimbursement program that it's dedicated funds for language services. But also want to just, as Gail mentioned, that we are also under the DC Office of Human Rights, the Language Access Program. So who is the Office of Human Rights? The Office of Human Rights was created to enforce, so we are an enforcement agency. To enforce what? To enforce the DC Human Rights Act of the 1977, which is one of the nation's most progressive civil rights laws. Of course, we have a number of traits that we are dedicated to protect, and we'll just mention that briefly, and Alkindi will share with you more information about that. And what do we do? As part of our establishment, the DC Office of Human Rights mission is to eradicate discrimination and increase equal opportunity and protect human rights for persons who live and visit the District of Columbia. Our agency has two main arms, as I call it. One is called the protected arm that works closely with the community and community engagement, as you probably do as well. And that covers outreach. We do a lot of work with outreach with different communities that we're doing right now. Informational campaigns, especially for those preventive programs that we have in our agency, and we also cover this, the director's inquiries. As part of the protected arm, we also have the piece on education. We have different trainings and educational materials that will really provide that as a resource for the community, as well as publications. We issue reports every year for the community to learn what do we do, how many cases we cover in terms of in our sponsor arm, and as well for those preventive programs as a youth bullying prevention program and others that we'll talk in a minute. On the sponsor arm, what do we do? As I mentioned, we are an enforcement agency. OHR investigates and adjudicates complaints filed against DCHR, against Human Rights Acts, and other applicable laws. Our main focus on this enforcement piece is compliance. So we have programs like the Language Access Program that ensures that we help agencies to be in compliance, but not only the Language Access Program. In the other programs, what we do is to build the capacity to ensure equal access. That's the main priority, equal access to services. Like, as I mentioned, the Language Access Program. Also on the public safety, like creating safer spaces, which is a new program that was created a year and a half ago in OHR, and a healthy educational environment for youth, which is covered under the bullying prevention program and more. We have the next slide. What are the 4 areas of enforcement? As I mentioned, we are an enforcement agency. We receive complaints that can fall under the educational institutions, housing, for discrimination on housing, employment, as well as public accommodation and government services, especially language services and language access, that we cover a lot about enforcement in government agencies and funded entities. I mentioned that we also make sure that we have cover and protect those protected traits. So as it stands now, OHR has 23 protected traits that are under our radar and the OHR radar, but not all of them apply to each of the enforcement areas that I mentioned earlier, which is housing, employment, public accommodation, and education. Not all of them apply to that. Believe there are 14 that apply to those 4 areas, and the rest are applies based on each one of the traits characteristics. OHR also has to enforce federal laws, and these are 6 of the federal laws that OHR is in charge to enforce, which is Title VII of the Civil Rights of 1964, which covers Equal Employment Opportunity Act, age discrimination in employment, Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which is Fair Housing Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, the Americans and Disability Act of 1990. This goes along with public accommodation in one of the enforcement areas, and the Genetic Information on Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. As well as the federal law, we also cover local laws, right? We enforce local laws, and this is the list of 15 of the local laws that OHR is in charge to enforce. And one of those that we'll be talking today in purposes of this presentation is Language Access Act of 2004. The Language Access Act of 2004 and the overview of the language access in DC. One of the things that I want to ensure that we all know that this act was, the purpose of this act is to ensure that every resident in the District of Columbia who are considered limited on non-English proficiency has equal access to government services as well as programs. It not only extends to government services, but to government agencies, but to funded entities, which requires that every government agency with public-facing contractors has to ensure that these residents or visitors or workers in the District of Columbia has full range of access to government services and programs, which means they have to receive interpretation and translation services at no cost. The spirit of this law, as I mentioned, is to eliminate language barriers, right? And avoid discrimination based on language, as a language trait. But one of the areas that we make sure that we enforce is that the community is informed. And I think this has to do a lot with the work that you do, which is working with your neighbors and letting them know that there are protected traits that are a law that really helping to support that they can get access, equal access to services. And one of the areas that they can do is participating in community meetings where they can break down language barriers. Although the act does not cover ANCs, the act is an important aspect of engaging your neighbors in any of the activities that you do. So this is why we are here today to mention about language access and how can we help you to contact and outreach your community through these services, through language services. We can move to the next slide, Hindi. And this is one of the resources and tools that I'm happy that it was passed in the recent years, and is the Omnibus Act of 2016, which affects the advisory neighborhood commissions. What does that mean? That means that OHR will be reimbursed your commissioners for translation and interpretation services for that happens to be rendered that for residents and commissioners who require such a service in relation to commission's documents or proceedings. So if there are services that there are meetings that require language services, commissioners will be reimbursed for those services. ANCs may request reimbursement for costs for providing written translation, oral interpretation, whether it's in person, if ever resume that in-person meetings, or the virtual interpretation services. Also, this part of the reimbursement program covers rental and purchase of assistive listening systems. Alkindi will explain in more details about what exactly those services will be, because he is the one who's going to be working directly with you when it comes to process your reimbursement requests. I mentioned that the reimbursement for translation and interpretation services covers virtual and with the COVID, it's being more and more on demand, the video remote interpretation rather than in person. This could happen in two modes. Could happen interpretation service simultaneously or consecutively. Now, Kindy will explain more about this. Just want to give you an overview of what services are covered under this act. Document translation and rental and purchase of the equipment. Thank you. Now, as part of the work I mentioned earlier, ANCs are not covered under the act. We highly encourage that they can reach out to their communities by providing these services. And a good way to engage and reach out to the LEP and NEP community, that stands for Limited English Proficiency Speaking Neighbors, is to work with your community-based organizations, businesses, community centers in your neighborhood that would allow to advertise your ANC meetings or any other activity or initiative for you. But in addition to those resources in the community, you have the government also as a partner on this. The 3 constituency offices are being very important in the work that we do when we outreach the LEP and NEP community. The Mayor's Office on Latino Affairs, the Mayor's Office on African Affairs, and as well for Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs. These 3 constituency offices are being key in the role that plays for communicating with their communities that they serve by using social media. And we just highlight like Mayor's Office in Latino Affairs. It doesn't mean that the other constituency offices also provide communication to the community with one of these social medias that we're listing here, but we've been very constantly monitoring what is the volume of work or the volume of communication between these constituency offices and their constituencies. And we're seeing that the Mayor's Office on Latino Affairs is being very proactive in terms of communicating with through Instagram to their constituencies, and as well as Twitter. I've seen that they also MOA, or Mayor's Office on African Affairs, also use a lot Instagram as a way to communicate with their constituency. These offices also seeing and most likely to ask agencies if they have any events or any initiative that they want to promote. They've been always constantly asking them. So I will highly encourage that you can connect with those constituency offices, that they can help you to spread the word of events or meetings that you may have in mind that you can share with these communities. When we do this work, when we reach out to NEP and NEP communities, something that we need to keep in mind is to use the taglines. The taglines are one of the ways that we can definitely engage communities by letting them know in their languages, especially we're talking about the top 6 languages that have been identified in the district that passed of the act, which are Spanish, Amharic, Chinese, French, Vietnamese, and Korean. If a document cannot be translated, at a minimum, we highly recommend that they should utilize translated taglines that can tell the reader of the availability for multilingual access. That is one of the main pieces that we will recommend in government agencies when they try to engage and communicate with their clients or customers. I think we have an example of how the tagline will look like in an advertisement, Cindy. Yes. This is an example of one of the constituency offices that were promoting and spreading the word about tax clinics. And as you can see in the blue box, there is a portion where we have the taglines. Instead of, we see examples of other events that it says, if you need interpretation services, please call this number. But it is in English. That means that it's not accessible for the communities who speak a different language. So if we have those taglines, we definitely can help the community to learn about the access to the service. So this is why we highly recommend use the translated taglines when you advertise your meetings or any other projects or events that you may have with your neighbors. If you need some of the translated taglines, we do have some of those taglines already translated. So just reach out to us and we can definitely provide that information to you. I think I'm gonna let Alkindi, if I'm not wrong, to explain in more details about what verbal interpretation of the ANC proceedings are, and as well for vital document translations or any document translation, and as well as rental of equipment. Please, Alkindi.
Thank you. Thanks, Rosa. Yes. So as Rosa mentioned, I will go over more in depth some of the services that were mentioned previously in this presentation, starting with verbal interpretation. So it is one of the services that we can reimburse an ANC if they procure the service from a vendor. These interpretation services may include telephonic interpretation. So this is when an interpreter is called into a telephone or conference call and provides verbal interpretation from English into another language or from another language into English. It also covers in-person interpretation. That is when the interpreter goes to the place of meeting and provides on-site interpretation, again, from English into another language or from another language into English. And the final one, which is becoming the most common version, is going to be virtual remote interpretation, in which a meeting platform, such as the one we are on now, is being used to hold a meeting, and an interpreter is called in to provide the information that is being presented in another language. Oftentimes, this might require a separate channel or perhaps a separate line for the other language to be used. Within all forms of interpretation, there are two modes. The first is consecutive, and this is a type of interpretation where the speakers would pause and allow the message to be rendered in the other language, whether it's English or non-English. And the other mode of interpretation is simultaneous, which is very similar to what we have this evening with the ASL interpreter, in which I am speaking and the interpreter is taking my message directly and immediately rendering it in another form of communication. When using an interpreter, we have a few tips. Oftentimes, it starts with some pre-meeting preparation. So we do recommend that people provide reference documents, definitions, expectations to the interpreter before the interaction. That way, everything is clear before the meeting starts. We also recommend that speakers engage and communicate to the non-English or limited English proficient individual directly and not direct their communication to the interpreter. We also encourage, or we recommend that speakers use simplified sentences, avoid idioms, professional jargon, and if acronyms are to be used, that they are defined the first time they are used. We also recommend eliminating side conversations so that the interpreter is not distracted and the non-English or limited English speaker is also not distracted. And finally, speak in a clear and slow manner so that the interpreter has enough time to convey the message. The next service that is reimbursable from our office is the translation of documents. So this is any translation from English into another language or from another language into English. For ANCs, that might include meeting agendas and minutes, outreach materials for any initiatives that you all might be launching, or public safety announcements, for instance. And finally, written motions, contracts, applications, briefs, summaries that you might want your neighbors to be aware of. During the pandemic, ANCs were generating their own public health notices and signs, and the translation of those notices and signs would have been covered by the language service reimbursement that we offer. On the flip side to that, ANCs, a few ANCs were requesting the translation of of documents that were generated by the DC government. And we would say that those were not covered by the reimbursement because it was up to the district government who generated the district government agency who generated that document to translate the document. As Rosa mentioned earlier, there was a Language Access Act that applies to district agencies. And if the agency generated that document, perhaps an ANC might notice that it was not available in another language. But the translation of that should have been done by the district government. So that's why we mention it here. And finally, assistive listening systems, the rental or the purchase of which are outlined in the 2010 Americans with Disabilities Act standards. This is also covered in the reimbursement. The process to reimburse is actually pretty simple. It is simply to contact me and copy the OANC email address that's listed here on the screen. There is a process to be able to receive payment from the district government, and that part is slightly more complicated and further complicated by the fact that the process was recently updated in October 2022. The summary of that is that an ANC seeking to receive reimbursement or payment from the district government must establish a vendor account with the District Integrated Financial System, also known as DIFS. And there is a process to do this. DIFS recommends that you can contact them directly, send them an email at suppliers@dc.gov, or visit their website, which I can put in the chat, where they have detailed instructions on how to establish an ANC as a vendor that can receive payment. Most ANCs who had been established before October 2022 and had received any payment from the district government probably established an account with the previous incarnation of DIFS, and that was called the Procurement Center for Excellence. If your ANC had already established itself with the Procurement Center for Excellence, it does not have to create a DIFS account unless you are updating some of the vital information, contact information, such as telephone number, email address, or checking account in which you'd like to receive automatic clearinghouse or ACH or direct deposit. So if you have any major changes to the contact, then we do recommend that you reestablish through DIFS. Once a DIFS account has been established, we have a two-step process essentially for receiving or processing reimbursement. You would simply send me the proposal quote from the vendor that had provided the service to you, an invoice or credit card receipt, statement, anything that shows that payment had been made to that vendor in the same amount for the quote that was provided, and some sort of evidence that the service was rendered. It could be a meeting note or a sign-in sheet from the interpreter. And you would send that to me and we would process that for approval. I would be sending that to an account manager at the Office of Chief Financial Officer. And they will then process the payment to whatever method you chose to receive payments, whether it be a check or automatic clearinghouse. On the screen now is a sample of the reimbursement form. I will be sending a packet with a fact sheet, this sample reimbursement form, as well as a blank reimbursement form to perhaps Director Bays or Ms. Fast, in hopes that they will distribute it to all ANCs. However, you can always contact me. I will put my email address in the chat. You can always contact me directly and request any of these forms or any guidance that you might be requesting, or anything that needs to be clarified, and we would be happy to assist you. We encourage agencies to submit reimbursement requests on a monthly basis. However, the final deadline to receive any reimbursement requests for services rendered in this fiscal year 2023, which started back in October 1st, 2022, and goes through September 30th, 2023. The deadline to receive reimbursement, or at least for me to receive the reimbursement request form, will be October 6th, 2023. But if I'm aware that you have something pending, you can just let me know, and we can work something out. ANCs are allowed to use any vendor that they choose. There's no restriction on what language, or excuse me, what language service vendor or listening device vendor you choose to procure services from. However, there are 3 in the district that the district government has deemed preferred vendors, and they have gone through quality assurance processes, just the fact that they're locally, they operate within the district. So these are the 3 listed, and again, we can include this in a packet that I send to the Office of ANCs, and they will distribute. But I want to make it clear that ANCs, unlike the district government agencies such as OHR, you all are not limited to use these 3. These are just 3 examples of vendors who you might use to provide services to your non-English or limited English proficient neighbors. Finally, I wanted to invite ANCs to trainings that OHR holds. We also offer consultations to any commissioners who might want to maximize this resource, outreach to limited English and non-English proficient neighbors. We also provide Know Your Rights trainings for constituents. If it is a language access specific Know Your Rights, our team would provide it. However, if you would like to know more about what OHR does and the 23 protected traits and areas of enforcement, you can reach out to us, and we will connect you with our communications and community engagement team. Thank you all so much for your time. I did want to open this up to some questions that you might have.
Yes, so thanks, Rosa and Alkindi, for the presentation. And I just want to make sure that everyone recognizes there wasn't a sort of typo. Our email address, and we put it in the chat, is OANCS, just like you see on the screen, at dc.gov. So there's an S at the end.
Thank you.
And no problem. And what we also just would like to emphasize is if you need the translation services, as Alkindi said, you'll email him and do that. And then we need you to contact our office so we can help you with the reimbursement. So I want to open it up to questions. Folks, what I will do is if you raise your hand, I'd like to unmute you, and then you can ask your question. If that's okay. I think okay, so Commissioner Galvin, I am going to unmute you and go ahead and ask your question. You should be unmuted. Oh, you just muted yourself. Let me try again.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yep.
Excellent. So this is excellent information. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time. One of my questions is, if we're like doing a simple document translation for like a poster or something like that, which I really don't feel like would need a professional document translation, is that is it offensive to use like Google Translate if it's just like, you know, headers and stuff like that? Or is it really recommended to actually go through a vendor?
So thank you for that question. Well, highly recommended not to use Google Translate for documents that are heavy in terms of dense of content. But as you just mentioned, if something that is as probably as light as it is, announcing something, probably, but I always recommend to have somebody who can do some quality control of that translation. Even when you use Google Translate for government agencies, we see in all type of edits, even in Spanish,
Yeah.
which is the language that has more populated vocabulary in Google. We see in like Metro, for instance, says ride Metro, and when it translates in Spanish, it's like riding a horse, something like that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
horrible, and many other examples. But it's getting more sophisticated and better in terms of getting more vocabulary because now people can provide feedback. But again, if you decided to go with Google Translate, I would highly recommend to go through a quality control, either with somebody who is proficient in language, in that particular language that you are translated, so they can do the quality check.
Great. Thank you so much. And I have one other smaller question, which is, let's say we have a full page, a single page of meeting minutes, let's say it's 1,000 characters. Is there a typical cost roughly? Because I have no idea what that would cost. Because we're putting together budgets for our new commission, and I'm just trying to think. It would be great to have this service available, but I have no idea what it would cost to do this.
1,000 words.
Yeah.
He can give you probably a perspective because he works closely with the vendors. And one thing that I want to mention, when Alkindi was doing a presentation on the preferred vendors, one other reason why it's been selected those vendors, it's because they have fixed rates that
Okay.
they're specifically for the DC government. Of course, has to be less than the regular commercial rate to the rest of the public. So ANCs can always take advantage of these rates. When I say advantages, I mean like really benefited from these fixed rates that is being offered to DC government agencies. And I'm going to let you answer that question just to give it a raw estimate. How a page, it depends on the language and for some vendors, but with this particular group of vendors, they have a fixed rate for all languages.
Mhm. That's right. So if you were to go through one of the vendors listed here, I think if it was $1,000 words, the estimate would probably be around $240, $260. I also wanted to say something about your previous question, Mr. Galvin, about using Google Translate. You're right that with as Rosa mentioned, with Spanish it is getting more sophisticated with more input. However, here in the district, one of the languages that we encounter very frequently is Amharic from our neighbors who've moved here from Ethiopia or of Ethiopian descent.
Yeah.
With Amharic, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rosa, but I think what we've found is that because it is a language that is very widely spoken here in the DC metro area, but not necessarily nationally, there hasn't been enough input. And oftentimes what we've found is when district agencies try to use Google Translate for that language, the translations have not been of very good quality. And that has caused some issues. I believe the Mayor's Office on African Affairs has brought this issue up, which is part of the reason why we recommend using translation vendors.
Gotcha. Great.
And-
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Galvin, I just want to just reiterate. So this is a reimbursement program, right? Obviously, you want to put your budget
Yeah.
so you have, some idea, but the idea is that you get the money back, right? So,
Yeah.
but also if you should say budget and you have exceeded that budget, the technical assistance fund is also something that you can tap into. And
Okay.
then, solicit additional funds. And of course, then it's reimbursed back to the technical assistance fund. But don't let the cost prohibit you from using translation services if you need it to reach your constituents. The whole purpose of this is to do it. And though it is not as simplified as ALS, and we have our interpreter here today, which is just simply filling out a form. We're going to try to simplify it even more, but it really is just contacting Al-Kindi, get the translator, get whatever you need translated, and then we'll work out the funding piece after.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
for all of anyone who's on the call, I don't want that to prohibit you or inhibit you from reaching out and using the service.
Yeah, yeah. And the only reason I bring that up is because we're a brand new commission, 5F, and so we have
Mhm.
literally $0 in the bank right now.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out how do I get at least some of the information out.
Yeah,
Because
so
we can't reimburse anyone yet. Yeah.
right. So I think for your group, probably using the technical assistance fund is probably a good idea. And you can
Okay.
contact our office, specifically talk to Dawn Dickerson, who sort of oversees that program. And we can assist you. And especially if these are vendors that are already in, and they are in what's known as the supply schedule, the district's supply schedule, it's a lot easier process to using any one of them. So we can help and
Great.
assist you get that process.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions? I want to make sure time sensitive. We did say that this was only a half-hour session. We probably should have extended it a little more, but I want to take any other questions that anyone has for any of the other fellow commissioners. No? Okay. Well, again, this was very, oh, go ahead, Rosa.
Sorry, I just want to emphasize what you just said about funding. With this act, there is a specific funding that comes, and there's an early question from I think from Director Bays about DC government local funds, local budget. So there is enough budget to cover at least in the last 2 years because we didn't have too many reimbursement requests. But please maximize as much as you can because you really, I mean, you or the group before you really work hard to make this act to pass. So it's important that residents not only, but important that this act can stand up and say, yes, it was an act that passed with a purpose, and the purpose is being served now, which is providing access, equal access to your neighbors. So the funding, it's available. It's just a matter of internally how is funding is being distributed or is being allocated with ANC. That's something that we probably want to understand better. If somebody comes to us, so Gail, I will follow up with you about that particular question that we have from the previous ANC commissioner.
Great. All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone. Thank Rosa Al-Kindi. Thank our interpreter for participating tonight. It's good to see Dawn on the call as well, my fellow colleague, who I don't see very often anymore in the because we have opposite days in our office. So anyway, I want to thank everyone. Have a great evening. As I said, this will be up on our YouTube channel, or you can link it right from our training resources on our About ANC page. So with this, I'm going to stop the recording and thank you all for coming tonight.